Recording in.
So today we're going to be covering web authentication with our Zyxel products. We're going to cover not only our USG and ATP firewall platforms, but we're also going to touch on Nebula as well. So let's go ahead and start with an agenda for today. I would like to start with the introduction and basically kind of going over exactly what web authentication is. And then we're going to move on to terms of service in the standalone products. And by standalone, I mean when the USG is put in standalone mode and it's not used in the cloud. Also, we're going to look at the terms of service for Nebula as well. Then we'll look at the user login for standalone and Nebula as well. We'll touch on Hotspot Management on the USGs, Nebula Vouchers, Facebook Wi-Fi for the standalone on the USGs, and Facebook login from Nebula. So let's take a look at web authentication and exactly what it is. So web authentication is basically a way for users to connect to the network with some type of authentication. This means that the users have to authenticate with either a terms of service page that they need to agree to, or to use some type of login to get access to the internet. You'll see this mostly used in hospitality, like hotels and coffee shops, where there'll be a sign posted where they provide the SSID, and it's usually an open network, but the moment you connect to it, you're presented with a splash page, and you either have to agree to the terms of service or enter in some type of username and password that's provided to you in order to gain access to the internet. Now, we support this on all of our devices with the USG Flex and the VPN and Nebula supporting all the features that we have available. This includes your basic terms of service, user agreement page, user login, and a dynamic user creation. With our ATP firewalls, we only support the user agreement and local user login. So with the web authentication, here are the different options that you can choose from. You can either choose to internally or externally host an HTML page that has the splash page information with the redirect information as well. You can do a click to agree that has your terms of service or user agreement, where users have to click to agree in order to gain access to the internet. We have our user login, which uses a static account, either internal or external radius. And we also have our dynamic account creation with our firewalls as well that can use Hotspot Management or the Nebula Voucher. And then we have Facebook Wi-Fi. And Facebook Wi-Fi uses Facebook in order to have the customer log into their Facebook account using their Facebook credentials in order to gain access to the internet. Now, when it comes to the licensing structure for our firewalls, this is basically how it's laid out. So if you want to just use the basic terms of service page or have a user login with a local database, there's no license that's required. The same thing is for our login with Facebook on the USG. However, if you want to log in with dynamic users that are created on the fly, and you have a dynamic created user account with a username and password, that requires Hotspot Management. Hotspot Management gives you the additional effect of having billing added on. So you can use PayPal, for example, to facilitate any type of billing profile or billing that's needed for that specific customer. And then you can set up time of use policies with the Hotspot Management. So that means that you can set up an account that only is available for 8 hours or expires after 8 hours, or you can set it up for a day or a week. For the cloud, we have a terms of service page that does not require a license, nor does a user account with the cloud database. However, if you want to log in with a voucher code or use Facebook Wi-Fi, that does require the Plus and the Pro Pass license for Nebula. So let's take a look at the terms of service page for our USGs and standalone mode. So in order to set up your terms of service page, you'll need to go to the configuration, web authentication, and the customer agreement file tab. In this tab, you'll find that there is a download button that allows you to download a zip file for the default user agreement. This zip file contains multiple different files for HTML, which you'll see here, that have the different settings that you can modify or edit. So here we have our CSS_M. That's going to be your CSS cascading style sheet for your mobile page. All of your images are going to be either in your images_M or your images folder, depending on if you're loading for mobile or regular web page. We have our JavaScript folder. We have our regular cascading style sheet for the non-mobile page. We have our default user agree page, our user agree page for mobile, our user agree welcome page, and our user agree welcome mobile page. So if we wanted to edit the user agreement page, we would just click on the user agree page, or the user underscore agree HTML, and you'll basically see that this is what it looks like. So if you were to click on that user underscore agree HTML file, this is the basic look and feel of what the standalone user agreement page looks like. So you have your internet access policy. There's a little blurb about what you can put for your internet access policy. And you'll also see that there's a name, phone number, address, email, and other fields. Now, these fields are there by default. However, they don't collect any information. It's going to be up to you to understand and know HTML coding so that you can input information so that when it's posted, it's sent to some kind of database like a SQL server. You can modify the fields to be removed by hiding those specific fields in the HTML code. And then also the logo up at the top where it says Zyxel, that can be replaced by putting in your own logo and replacing in the images folder by overriding the h_logo.png file. Now, if we were to go ahead and edit this with our favorite editor, we would just go in, take a look at it, and you'll see on line 94, we have the acceptable user policy. So you can modify that to say whatever you want. And then under the label tag, you can choose your own blurb for your user policy. So this is going to be your terms of service. Now, once you've made all of your edits, what you'll do is you'll take all the files, and you can't change the name. You have to leave the names as is, but you change the file contents how you see fit. And once that's been done, you zip everything back up and put it into a zip file. You take that zip file and go into your custom user agreement file section on the firewall, and you upload that zip file. Once that zip file has been uploaded, you'll see it in the file manager. So here I have demo user agreement.zip as the file that I created. After doing this, we want to add that user authentication to our authentication type. So we go over to Web Authentication, Authentication Type, and click on Add. Here, we would set it to user agreement, give it a profile name, and then for the customized file, we would choose the one we just uploaded. So that demo user agreement file, the zip file, we would point to that in the drop-down list. Once that's been done, we need to go ahead and set up the web authentication. So we go over to Web Authentication in general, enable the web authentication, and now we must set up a policy that defines who has to authenticate. So under Web Authentication Policy Summary at the bottom, we would click on Add, and then we would go down to our Policy Add section that pops up, and we would choose which addresses or which subnets have to authenticate. So under Source Address, we would choose, in this case, LAN 1 subnet, and then we would force the user authentication to use the authentication type as we have set up already. So once that's done, the users now have to authenticate when they connect to the firewall or any AP that's connected to the firewall. Now for Nebula, it's slightly different. So with Nebula, you can set up your terms of service on the AP or the gateway. The gateway only has the ability to set up the terms of service or user login agreement. And the AP has the same options as the gateway. However, the AP does have an addition of Facebook Wi-Fi, which we'll cover later on. So within Nebula, to set up terms of service, you go to Security Gateway, or if you're using the USG Flex, you would go to the USG Flex, go to Configure, and then Captive Portal. And then under Captive Portal, you'll see under Interface, you can drop down and choose which LAN has to authenticate. Here, you'll see that you have an option to add a logo, your message which pops up, and then the message after the user successfully authenticates. Additionally, what you need to do is under Network Access, under Configuration, Network Access Method, you have to set it up so that it's set to click to continue. So that basically means that when users sign on, they must click the user agreement to be able to access the internet. Now for the AP, it's pretty much the same thing, except for in the drop-down list at the very top, instead of selecting your LAN 1 or your LAN 2, you choose which SSID you would like your terms of service page to pop up on. So under Access Point, Configure, and captive portal customization, this is where you would set that up. Pretty much the same thing as the gateway. You have the option to choose your logo or change your logo, set your message, and then set your message for when the user successfully authenticates. And again, with the access point, you have to go over to configure the SSID settings and set it up to click to continue, similar to the gateway. So that forces the Nebula to know that the user must click either agree to continue or disagree to no longer have access to the internet. Now, if you want to change some of the look and feel of the Nebula authentication page, we do have themes that are built in. The ability to change it is kind of limited, but you can change the font size, you can change the color, and there are some CSS codings that you can change that's all within Nebula itself. Additional options that you can set for your Nebula is you have the ability to set up an external portal. So that means that if you don't want to use the internal portal on Nebula, you can set it to point to a specific external page. What this requires you to do is download the customized code, modify it, and then upload all of the contents onto your externally hosted web server. Once this is done, you then point to that URL in the external captive portal URL section. Now, just be aware when it comes to setting up an external captive portal, you have to use the zip file that's provided, and you must build the page from the ground up. You won't be able to take the code and import it into a page that's already been built because it can cause some issues. So we recommend that you build the page specifically from scratch using the provided zip file contents and HTML files and build it from the ground up. Next, for user login for the firewalls in standalone mode. So with user logins in standalone mode, what you can do is you can use built-in users that have already been created in order to gain access to the internet. So this means that if you were setting up a hotel, you can set it up so that each room has a static username. So it could be room 101, room 102, room 103, so on and so forth. And then you can have a dedicated password for each and every room. So in order to set that up, you would go to configuration and then object, user group, and then user. You would then add a user who will be used to authenticate for web access. So in this example, I've set up a user called demo user and gave that user a password. Once that's been set up, we need to go to the custom web portal file, similar to setting up a custom user agreement file. So under authentication and custom web portal, we want to download the default _wp.zip file. When you open it up, you're going to find that there's a lot more files than you saw with the user agreement page. And the reason being is that because with the standalone user login option, you have not only the user option, or so the user login option, but you also have the ability to do a terms of service as well. So what this means is that the users will first get hit with the terms of service page if you choose that option. Once they agree, they then get forwarded to log in with their username and password credentials. So you'll see that basically you have your CSS, your images, and all of your default files for your login, your logout, your session. The session page is basically what displays the amount of time left for the account when using Hotspot Management. So once we talk about Hotspot Management, you'll see that you can set up an account to have a specific amount of time that they can stay authenticated for. And once they authenticate, there'll be a page that pops up that shows them the amount of time they have left. Of course, you have your welcome page, you have your terms of service, and you have your login page. So if you were to look at the login page, this is the basic login page, the basic look and feel of what it looks like. You'll see that it requires very little editing. You can change the logo, again, by replacing the h_logo.png file in the images folder. What you can also do is with advanced HTML users, you can set it up to autofill and hide the username field for a shared account. Not something we recommend, but we've had customers come to us in the past where they said that they want a page to pop up where it only has a password field. And in order to do this, you would have one shared user account that's shared by everybody. And then what you would do is you would set the HTML to autofill in that specific username, then hide that field. And so only the password box shows up. So that means when someone connects up, they just enter in a password. Again, that's not something we recommend, but you can see that you have a lot of options when it comes to the HTML code. Once you've made your modifications to the file, zip everything up like before, put it into a zip file, and then upload it under the custom web portal file. Once it's been added, you'll find it in the list, and then you'll have to go over and create an authentication type again. So by going to authentication type, click on add, select the option as web portal, and then select your customized file as your login file that you created in the previous step. Once done, we have to set up the authentication method. We go over to web authentication, general, enable the web authentication, and then we click on add to add the web authentication policy. Under the web authentication policy, you would set your source address to define which subnet has to authenticate, and then you would choose the authentication type for that particular zip file that you uploaded earlier. Next, same thing for Nebula login. A little bit different here, but under the Nebula login, it allows you to create predefined user accounts for self-registration. And what this means is that within Nebula, you can either make a predefined account, or you can set up a link so that the customer has to click the link to register themselves. So with the self-registration, the users have a link on the login page, and then they can create their username and password. With the self-registration, you can set it up to require approval by a manager. So that means that whoever is managing the Nebula account or managing that Nebula site would get an email, and they'd have to approve that account that has been registered in order to gain access to the internet. So for Nebula Gateway, without self-registration, you go to organization-wide, configure, and then cloud authentication. Under cloud authentication, you would click the add button, and this gives you the ability to create your own user. So you'll put in the username or email, you put in the description of what kind of a user it is, and then you can click the button to generate a password automatically for them. Once this has been created, you can click the option to email the account information to the user so that they receive an email with the account information for the login. Once the account has been created, you have to go over to the Nebula Gateway and choose Cloud Authentication as the sign-in method. So under Security Gateway, you go to Configure, Network Access Method, and click on Sign On with Nebula Cloud Authentication. Under the Captive Portal Access attribute, you can choose whether you want to allow self-registration or not. So in this example, we've turned off the self-registration. For the AP, somewhat similar, you will go over to Access Point, configure SSID settings, choose your SSID, and then set it to sign on with Nebula Cloud Authentication. And again, with the self-registration, choose whether or not you want to allow users to create their own accounts with self-registration. Next, Hotspot Management. So Hotspot Management is going to be our license feature for the VPN, USG, and Flex models. That's perpetual license. So you buy it once, and then that's it. You have it for life. This allows you to create the ability to create building profiles. And what I mean by building profiles is you can set it up so that when a user authenticates, depending on what option you choose, you can have them authenticate and have access for 1 hour or a day or a week. So there's different options for building profiles that you can set up. The Hotspot Management also opens up the ability to use the 3-button thermal printer. So we sell an optional thermal printer called the SP350E that can be used in conjunction with Hotspot Management. With this, you also have time of use policies. So we have accumulation or time to finish, which I'll get into in a moment. You can set it up as paid or non-paid usage, and then you can also set it up with a PayPal portal. So that means that when customers log in, they have the ability to set it up so that they can pay for the usage for the accounts with their PayPal. So here's the optional SP350E printer. It has 3 buttons on it that you can program to specific time-based accounts. So you'll see there's an A, B, and a C button. So within the GUI of the firewall, you can set it up so that if you press the A button, it prints out a ticket for 1 hour usage. B could be 1 day, and C could be like a week. When the ticket's printed out, it has the information on the ticket. It also displays the SSID that they have to connect to, and then it tells them the amount of time that they have on the account, and then gives them their username and password. The username and passwords are dynamically generated, so you don't have to go in and create them for the user. It automatically generates it. So to set up the thermal printer, you just need to go into Hotspot, Print Manager in general, and enable the printer. Connect it to your network, and it should be able to automatically pick it up. However, if you're having a problem picking it up, you can do Discover Printer, and it will try to find the printer automatically on your network. For setting up a billing profile, you can go to Hotspot, Billing, and then Billing Profile, and then click on Add. So in this example, we set up a billing profile that's good for 1 day. You can set up bandwidth management on it, so you can set up the amount of bandwidth that's available for that user, so you can do bandwidth management restrictions. And then once you've created your time period, you can then assign it to the buttons on the printer. So here you'll see I have button A is set for 1 day, and then button B and C are set to 30 minutes each. So this information then communicates with the thermal printer so that when the button's pressed, it prints out a ticket that then generates a unique user with a username and password that's bound to a specific time period. Now, in terms of time periods, we have two options. We have time to finish and we have accumulation. With time to finish, it basically means that when the device is, or when you log in, the counter starts. So let's just say that you have 8 hours. The moment you log in, the timer is already started. However, with accumulation, that means that if a customer logs into the Wi-Fi, they log in for an hour and then they leave and they come back 5 hours later. If it was an 8-hour ticket, they still have 7 hours left. So again, time to finish, timer based on the account that starts the moment the account is generated. And then accumulation only counts the time a user is logged in. We also have an option for free time. So in free time, you can grant users free access for a short period of time. So this means that if a user doesn't want to pay right away, if you have it set up for billing, or you just want to grant free access for 10 minutes, you can set up free time. You can set it up so that free time has a max number of attempts. So let's just say that somebody comes in, they log in the first time, their free time is set to 30 minutes and it expires. You can set it up to either 1 or 2 or 3 times before they get cut off, but we recommend setting it to 1. You can set it to reset at a specific time so that if a person is visiting a location, they get free time for 5 minutes and then they're locked out for a whole day. So they can come back the next day and get 5 minutes of free time if you have it set up that way. Nebula Vouchers. So Nebula Vouchers works similar to Hotspot Management, and it's only available on the AP. So what I mean by similar to Hotspot Management is it creates a unique username and passwords with accounts that expire at a specific time that you specify. It does not utilize a thermal printer, and the thermal printer cannot be used with a Nebula Voucher. And also with the Nebula Vouchers, you have 2 options. You can create the vouchers on demand by logging into the Nebula portal for that site and then generating a voucher, or you can batch them out. So you can create 20 or 30 or 40 different Nebula Vouchers and then hold them at the front desk. So if you have a hotel and you want to provide Nebula Vouchers, you can print them out ahead of time and cut them up in little pieces of paper because you can print them to your local printer. You can cut them out and then have a staff waiting so that when somebody comes in, they are staying at a hotel or hotel room, you would give them that piece of paper that has the voucher that's already been printed out in batches. So to set up your Nebula Vouchers, you can set it for Wi-Fi access. You would go into your SSID, choose the SSID, set your security option as open because you don't want to have another form of authentication. You already have the voucher that's going to do your authentication for you. And then you set up your sign-in method as the voucher. Next, you go to Site-Wide, Monitor, and Vouchers. And then you want to go ahead and create a voucher by clicking on the Create button. When you create the voucher, you have the ability to set up 1 or multiple vouchers. You can decide on the code length, the duration, and then it'll purge the account after X amount of days. So once you hit the button for print after created, it will give you the option to connect to your printer, and then you can print out the voucher, and this is what the voucher looks like. So it has the SSID, it has the hours that the voucher is valid for, and then it has the login code. So that means that when they connect to the SSID, they'll get a page where they need to log in with their voucher code. Next is going to be Facebook Wi-Fi. So Facebook Wi-Fi in standalone mode. Facebook Wi-Fi allows you to have users connect to your Facebook business page. So when users connect to the Facebook business page, they can either choose to like or check in order to have access to the internet. It connects directly to your Facebook developer's account, which means that you're able to gather statistics and demographics of the users that are logging in. And this option is only available on the USG, VPN, and Flex, and the ATP is not included. This option is also available in Nebula as 2 different flavors. We have Facebook Login, which is free, and then we have Facebook Wi-Fi, which is licensed. And I'll get into the differences of both of those in just a moment. So on Standalone on the firewalls, all you would have to do is go over to Web Authentication, Facebook Wi-Fi, and then enable Facebook Wi-Fi and click on Apply. You'll notice that the configuration button is grayed out, and that is by design. First, you have to apply it once it's been enabled, and then once you've done that, the configuration button becomes available. Once it becomes available, it'll tell you that this device is not paired with Facebook, and you'll have to click on that button in order to configure your Facebook to connect to the firewall. When you click on that button, it'll redirect you to Facebook and you'll have to log in. And if you don't have a business page, it's going to ask you to create one. So then you go in and create your Facebook page, you put in your local business information, and then you're pretty much all set. Now, if you already have a page, you'll be taken straight to the Facebook Wi-Fi configuration page. So from the Facebook Wi-Fi configuration page, you would use the drop-down list to select your business that has already been created. You have a choice to do a skip check-in or require Wi-Fi code. So skip check-in basically means that when the user logs in or they connect to the Wi-Fi, they'll be automatically redirected to your business Facebook site. So on that business page, there'll be a link that either says the skip check-in or require Wi-Fi code. If you click the skip check-in link, it'll automatically allow the user to basically get onto the internet. But what this does is it basically gives your business visibility to the customer by having them land on that particular page first. And then finally, you can set the session length of how long the customers have before they have to authenticate. Once you've done that, you go back to your configuration on the firewall. You go to Configuration, Web Authentication, General, and then you would set your web authentication and enable it, and then click on Add for Web Authentication Policy Summary. And then you would choose the Facebook login as the login. And then finally, for Nebula login for Facebook. So with Nebula, there's 2 different flavors. Like I said, there's Facebook login and there's Facebook Wi-Fi. So starting with Facebook login, it does not require a license in Nebula. The users log in with their Facebook credentials, and it's required. So if they don't have a Facebook account, they will not be able to access the internet. Once they log in, it does gather analytics to the developer account so that you can see information about who's connected up. With Facebook Wi-Fi, it requires the Plus or Pro pack. The users are automatically redirected to the Facebook business page account. However, they do not require a Facebook account to log in. They can either like the page, check in, or it can be skipped with the option to require Wi-Fi code. And what you can do with require Wi-Fi code is, if you have that option, it basically informs the user that they need to come speak to a manager or an employee to ask for the Wi-Fi code. And it's just an option for having interactions with the customers that visit the business. So under Facebook login under Nebula, you go to Access Point, Configure, SSID, set your sign-in method to sign on with Facebook, and then you set your policy to block all access until signed on. So that's basically all you would have to do is set it up with Facebook Wi-Fi or Facebook login. The strict policy means that the users cannot access the internet until they log in with the username and password from Facebook. So you'll see here that once they try to access the Wi-Fi, they'll be redirected to a Facebook page where they have to log in. Once they put their information in, it'll tell them basically that they just need to continue as the user, and then they'll have access to the internet. With Facebook Wi-Fi with Nebula, it's a little bit different. So first you would choose your sign-in method as Facebook Wi-Fi, and then underneath it, there's an option for configure Facebook settings here. You click on that link, which then takes you to the same page as before with standalone mode. If you don't have a business page created, it will prompt you to create one, put in the information for it. If you already have a Facebook page already created for your business, again, you'll select your Facebook page in the drop-down list, choose whether you want to skip check-in or require Wi-Fi code, and set the session links. Once this is done, when the users access the Wi-Fi, they're redirected to the business Facebook page where they can log in, check in, or skip check-in altogether. And that's it for the web authentication for our security products in Nebula. I'm going to leave the floor open for any Q&A at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. That was an awesome presentation. We have some couple questions here. Can you set up pages that can be accessed without having to authenticate?
Yes, you can. That's going to be our, we call it our walled garden. And what you can do is with the walled garden, you can put in, say, your business page. So if you're at a hotel, like maybe you're at Marriott or a Days Inn or Hilton, what you can do is you can put that particular URL in the walled garden, and the walled garden allows you to access specific pages without having to authenticate, which is great because in a hotel, let's just say the customer doesn't really need internet access, they just want to change the reservation. You can put the hotel's web page into the walled garden. Therefore, the customer doesn't have to authenticate to access the internet for that particular page.
Awesome. All right. Our second question, what kind of information is collected by Facebook?
Okay, the type of information that's collected from Facebook generally is going to be the demographic. So it's going to be the age, I believe it's going to be age and location, and that's sent to the developer side on the Facebook account. So that information is stored within Facebook, because if you're using Facebook Wi-Fi or Facebook altogether, it does collect that information for users that log in, and it's only the users that log in.
Great. Okay, the next question is, can you set bandwidth limits for users who authenticate?
Yeah, actually you can. So one of the things that you can set up with your with the Hotspot Management is that when you create a billing profile, and it's only found specifically when you do the billing profiles, you can set up bandwidth managements for each user that logs in for a specific profile. So if you have, I'll give you an example. We had a customer not too long ago that required that they gave free internet access, but they set the free internet access to, I think it was like 6 hours. But on that tier, because they're paying for free or they're not paying, they set it so that they had the lowest amount of bandwidth. So they had, I think, 500 kilobits per second, very low. But then they had it set up so that if you paid for the higher tiers, you had higher bits of bandwidth. And if you were, say, like a Netflix user or a person that wanted to stream media, it required the highest tier for the paid account, and they set that up to have the highest bandwidth possible. So with the billing profiles with Hotspot Management, it is possible to set bandwidth tiers for your users.
Great. Okay, we have last couple of questions. Is there any benefit from using Facebook Wi-Fi over regular Facebook login for Nebula?
Yes, there is actually. When you use Facebook Wi-Fi, the added feature is the customer doesn't technically have to log in with their Facebook credentials. So there are people out there that do not have a Facebook account and they don't want one. So if you use the Facebook Wi-Fi option that just redirects them to the page, you can have them not require any type of Facebook login to gain access. You can just have them log in as a guest, which does not require them to have a Facebook account. And then they can therefore either like the page or check in. And then that basically prevents the user from having to sign up for a Facebook account. So that's a general use of having Facebook Wi-Fi over regular Facebook, because if you have the regular Facebook login, it does require a Facebook account to log in. And again, there are some people who are wary about having a Facebook account. Therefore, you end up locking them out of having internet access if you go that route.
Okay, that's very informative. Okay, last question. Are there any plans to add Hotspot Management to the ATP series?
For the ATP, no. At this time, they wanted to keep the Hotspot Management separate from the ATP series, mainly because the ATP is more focused on your security and sandboxing. So your ATP is the firewall with the most security on it, and they at this time they don't want to add Hotspot Management at this time.
Awesome. Okay, Marcus, we're going to announce the winner now for the $25 Amazon gift card.
All right, sounds good.
All right, and the winner is, drum roll, Stephen Wilkenman. Congratulations, Stephen. All right.
Congratulations,
Back to
Stephen.
you, Marcus.
All right. So if you guys have any other questions about anything that you've seen today, please feel free to drop me a line. You can email me, marcush@zyxel.com, if you have any questions about the presentation. And then we're going to go ahead and, I guess, leave this up for a little bit longer. But again, my email is right there on the screen. If you need to email me about anything you've seen today, please feel free to reach out. And thank you for joining.
All right, and that wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for all attendees. And congratulations to the winner, Stephen Wilkenman. And we will see you on our next webinar. Have a great weekend, guys.
Bye, everyone.